I've paid thousands of dollars in courses to learn what you're basically teaching on your podcast for free. What you're putting out there is so valuable. So, I just really want to acknowledge you, and I definitely send everyone to your podcast.
You were virtually one of the first mentors that I looked up to and started following. You're always one step ahead of the game. So I just wanted to give you kudos and props for that, because lots of people are watching, lots of people are learning from it.
Tucker and the whole TTM crew, Dan and Chris, thanks so much for your support. I love what you guys do, and a huge, huge fan. Having this support's huge. So I'm grateful for that.
What's up, everybody out there in listener land? This is episode 238 of the Real Dealz podcast. And as always, I am your host, Tucker Merrihew. I've got another episode for you guys this week, and this time it's just you, me, and the microphone. I got a great interview lined up for next week, but I wanted to do another solo show. And I was thinking about, what do I want to talk about this week? And it dawned on me that this week of this month, is the 10-year anniversary of what is now TTM Development Company, our flagship company here in Portland that does a lot of redevelopment projects, building, new construction, all kinds of stuff. But it was 10 years ago that I actually formed the LLC, or the company, so that we could start renovating and flipping houses at mass, basically, or at scale. Prior to that, I did it in my own name. I had done it in my mortgage company's name, or other LLCs, other partnerships. But this company, TTM Development Company, was created 10 years ago this month. So pretty crazy. So we're coming up on our 10-year anniversary. But it got me thinking about what the market was like 10 years ago. There's a lot of people out there right now talking about, what they're doing to kind of protect themselves, or what they think might happen, or how we can survive in the market corrects, or when the market corrects moving forward. But very few of these people were actually in the midst of it 10 years ago. And so I want to take a walk down memory lane, tell you guys a couple of interesting stories, some things that I experienced 10 years ago that were a little wily, a little crazy at the time, but also kind of, talk about what the landscape was like back then and compare it to now. And then from that, what's the quote? They say those that don't understand or know history are doomed to repeat it. From that, we can kind of conclude what we think may or may not happen moving forward with the real estate market. So I want to take a little walk down memory lane and entertain you guys at the same time. And so that's the plan for this week's show. Now, before I get into all that, a couple things I want to talk about in terms of housekeeping items. Number one is our Driving for Dollars app. If you have not already, make sure you go download it. It's free to download. You get a 5-property free trial. It's called the Driving for Dollars app in the iTunes Store or the Google Play Store, depending on whether or not you have an iPhone or an Android phone. And it's free to download, so there's no reason not to do that. And then after that, it's $19.99 a month, and you can pull all the data you need in order to market to people on a consistent basis in a number of different ways. You get not only who owns the property and what their mailing address is, you also get the previous sale date and amount, you get the mortgage information on the property, and of course, you get the phone number, so you can layer in some ringless voicemails, you can do some on-the-spot cold calling, you can do all kinds of things, and so text blasting. But more importantly, it's only $19.99 a month, and you can build as many lists as you want. And we use it each and every week. So go download it. It's free, like I said, to download, and give it a trial run. Give it a try, as they say, and see if you like it. And I know you will. Now, on top of that, we also have some updates that we're doing. One of the biggest ones is tracking, so you can see exactly which streets you've already driven. It's pretty easy to tell that anyway when you drop pins, but we're tracking, the tracking feature will be in place here very shortly, so that it's even easier for you to know where you have driven before. And we're also doing a variety of other different updates that'll just make use for you, the user, a lot easier, just kind of the overall user experience. So we're in the midst of doing that so that everybody knows, but make sure you go download it. And also we have our Driving for Dollars podcast as well, where I talk about some different strategies and ways to use the app and Driving for Dollars to improve your Driving for Dollars experience and ultimately improve the number of deals that you get from it. So if you haven't already, make sure you check that out. out. Now, on another podcast note, I know this sounds like a lot of podcasts, but we released last week the House Flipping Golden Nuggets podcast, which is basically excerpts of this show from way back in the day when we had the Golden Nuggets segment, and also new ones that we're creating, which is basically bite-sized portions of this podcast or pieces of information that you can put to work immediately and absorb and put them to work in your real estate investing business. So these shows run kind of long sometimes, and so we wanted to make a much shorter show that's much more condensed, 10 minutes and under, and that way you can take that information, hopefully absorb it, and put it to work in your business. So if you have not already, make sure you go subscribe to the House Flipping Golden Nuggets podcast. It's got the same avatar as this one, except it says House Flipping Golden Nuggets across it, and you'll see myself talking into a microphone, so make sure you go check that out. Last but not least on the housekeeping items list is our Deal Finders Academy Mastermind Group. If you are interested at all in joining about 120 some odd of the best investors from across the country and rubbing virtual elbows with them each and every day, feel free to reach out to us. We'd love to see if you would be a good fit for our group. And like I said, it's a tremendous community, and that's really what a lot of these mastermind groups are about. It's about being a part of a community that, not only do you get a lot of great information from, but also building great relationships and using those relationships to kind of further your network and your ability to find answers or find connections or find people, because a lot of this business is about having the right people and the right suggestions, and that's really where a lot of the value comes in these mastermind groups. And so if you guys are interested at all, we would love to chat with you. Again, our mastermind group is called the DFA, and it's a tremendous value. It's only $199 a month. We haven't raised the prices in almost 5 years, and it's just a tremendous value, and there's just a lot of really awesome people in it. So reach out to us, and we would love to see if you would be a good fit to join us there. Now, usually I talk about what's going on with me and TTM over the course of the past week at this point in the show, but since all I'm going to talk about is stuff about me this show, I figured I'd cut it out. So without further ado, let's get into the rest of the show. All right, Real Dealz podcast listeners, I want to talk quickly about our show's sponsor, Iron Bridge Lending. If you guys have not reached out to Iron Bridge already to talk to them about funding some of your upcoming flip projects, I highly encourage you to do so. I've known the owner of Iron Bridge for a very long time. I've personally borrowed millions of dollars from them over the years to do a number of different projects, and I can say without a doubt, they are the best hard money lending company I have ever come across, and that is the reason why they are the sole sponsor of this show. I've had a lot of other companies reach out to me and want to sponsor this show, but I just won't do it. I feel like I need to be genuine in who we have sponsoring the show, and it needs to be somebody that I've personally done a ton of business with. So I personally vouch for their ability to be the best, hands down, in the world of hard money lending. You won't find better programs, you won't find better terms, and they're lending or will be lending in over 20 states. So chances are, if you're hearing this in whatever state you're in, it's definitely worth it to check out their website, reach out to them, see if they're lending in your state, and if they are, I would absolutely encourage you to do business with them. Another very cool thing to note is that they have a program for most rehabs where you can actually borrow up to 90% of the purchase price. Now, this is given the fact that you are actually buying a deal, which if you're listening to the show, that means you probably are. But if you have an actual deal on the table, they'll fund up to 90% of your purchase price, and they'll even give you rehab funds on top of that, which means that it only takes 10% down to get into a project, which is unbelievable in the hard money world. So do yourself a favor, reach out to Iron Bridge Lending, have a conversation with them, see if they're a good fit for you and for your next project. I can guarantee you that you'll be happy that you did.
All right, guys, let's go back in time. Let's take the time capsule and let's go back to 2008, right? And the reason being is because there's a lot of talk out there right now, as I mentioned, about guys that are weary of the market, that are sitting on the sidelines, they're waiting for a big crash and correction, or they're just waiting for the big I told you so. And sometimes, that's a good thing. We're cautiously moving forward with our investments, but we're not sitting on our hands, definitely not. And the reason being is because we've been through the last bust, and the last bust was gnarly. It was really, really gnarly. And the funny thing is that a lot of people that are in the game these days, maybe recognizable within the real estate investing community, a lot of them were either not even in high school yet, or, definitely not out in the real world, in the trenches, in this real estate game. So it's not a knock on them, but it's just the fact that they haven't been to battle. They haven't been to war in terms of, a real shit-tastic real estate market. And I have. And that's actually where we built this business. We became exponentially more successful in the last collapse in the midst of what was just a shitstorm, personally, market-wise, everything else. And so I want to kind of paint the picture, and that way you guys can tell why I'm not really that fazed. I'm not really afraid of what will be an eventual thinning of the herd, what will be an eventual challenging market. It's just a matter of time when that comes back. So let's rewind to 2008, right? For those of you guys that were around, it was about mid-2008 that I bought an ebook, actually. It was a guy that I don't think he's around anymore, but he had an ebook that was called Mold is Gold. And it was all about buying REOs that have mold in them. And you could basically use that mold to scare the hell out of the banks. And if you scare the hell out of the banks, they'll give you a great price on the property. And I actually used that strategy, believe it or not, to get our first REO under contract. I've told the story long time ago on the podcast, but property was listed at like 159. We originally offered 130 after it'd been on the market for a little bit. They took it. I did some inspections, found some mold, and then I was so scared because the market was just, it was dog shit. And there was no retail buyers or wholesale buyers, excuse me. It was pure retail. If you were going to try and wholesale something, forget about it. In Portland here, there was no such thing as a wholesale buyer back then. Or if they were, it was very, very, very few and far between. So we found some mold under the house, and I gave them basically a repair addendum that said we're adjusting the price to I think it was $101,000 or something just ridiculous. And the reason I did that is because honestly I was scared shitless that they might take this, and if they do, then I've got to move forward with this project. And I still remember the call to this day when I got the call from the realtor at the time, who said, guess what? They took it. And I was like, oh my God. So that was it. We hit go. But around that time, just to kind of continue to paint the picture of what it is that we were dealing with, there was a couple gurus out. Many of you guys may remember Preston Ely. He had Probates by Preston. I think that was like the only real course out there that, in hindsight, was a dog shit product, but it was selling for $300. I think he probably made a killing because there was no other competition in the market. And then there was, of course, the short sale kid, that guy that was running around with leopard spots all over his head. And there was a variety of other colorful characters in the guru space as well that it got slimmed down, but they kind of, they were probably the voice of guruism, through the crash era. Anyway, so that was 2008. Now, the market was horrible. Prices were dropping. Short sales were huge. On a side note, I also had a mortgage business. And this is part of the reason, this is kind of on a personal side. I've never told this story before, but I had a mortgage business, and this goes into some of the lessons that I've learned over the last 10 years, one of which being you got to hire the right people. And I hired a couple of the wrong people within my mortgage business as I was building it. And the reason why I hired them is because obviously their production was good. And if their production was good, the company did better. And if the company did better, I did better. And so I hired based on production and not based on character. And in the end, it put me in a real shitstorm that I had to deal with, on top of the fact that the market was kind of collapsing around us, and we were trying to figure out how to make money, and we were trying to build this company that was going to flip houses at the same time. But the story I want to tell you is that one day, in the midst of working on that first project, I still was running our mortgage operation out of the same office. It was kind of the hub. We had our Washington license, and we had a branch up in Washington, and we had occasionally a loan or two would go through. And one day, the Finance and Securities Division for the state of Oregon showed up with subpoenas, and they basically raided my office. They showed up, banged on the door. I still remember Donna. She was in the office next to me at the time, who worked for the real estate company that we shared an office with. She came back and she said, there's some guys here with some subpoenas, and it doesn't look good, and said it real quiet. And I was like, what the fuck? Okay. And so I walked up front, and they hit me with the paperwork, and they basically demanded to see X, Y, and Z files, a whole bunch of different mortgage files. And all of which were files from an individual that I had hired. But what I didn't know was he was doing a lot of shady stuff, and there was a whole bunch of shady stuff going on back then. And his big scam was basically finding people to buy houses from a builder at a inflated price, and the builder and him were working out a deal on the back end where they basically extract money, kick it back to the people, and or the people get a percentage, and then the loan officer who put this all together gets a piece, and then he had some partners that took a piece. And so it was this big pump and dump scam that basically it was just a big shit mess. And the Finance and Securities Division, they thought I was in on the whole thing. And so basically they came at me hard because they thought I was the one masterminding this whole thing. The whole time, I just thought he had great clients and he was stroking them pretty good on the loan fees, which was a good thing for me. And, at that point, I was like, well, he's got great production and his clients seem happy. All his clients had like 700 plus credit scores. So they fit like the epitome of like the perfect borrower, which in hindsight, he was kind of framing them. And I'll continue the story. They were actually all related some way, shape, or form, even though they had different last names. But he had planned this out completely. But long story short, the Finance and Securities Division thought that I was the ringleader of this whole thing. So they came at me real hard. And so I still remember I called my attorney. I had him on the phone while I'm standing there in my office. And he was walking me through it. And he said, demand to see the subpoena, read it to me, all those things. And fortunately, at that point, I said, look, I don't have the files on site, and so you're going to have to just, wait for me to go get them, at another time. And they basically said, you've got, 48 hours or something like that to deliver them, or we'll be back. And if we're back, we're, basically going to tear the office apart till we find them. So I said, okay. So I basically had to get the files to them, and fast forward, essentially what happened is they continued to try and pin what was ultimately, mortgage fraud that this individual ended up getting charged for, the loan officer eventually, but they were trying to pin it all on me. And so I had one of those trips down to Salem where I sat in a room and they had me up at the, basically the government building where they do the interrogation room, where you have your attorney sitting across from a couple of finance and securities agents, and they try and intimidate you and do this and do that. And it was probably the most difficult experience of my life because they were basically, painting me out to be the mastermind of this pump and dump scheme, which honestly I had nothing to do with. Had I known that he was doing this, I would have, let him go because it was obviously a really bad thing. But he wasn't the only one doing this. There was a lot of guys out there that were pulling this scheme. He just happened to get caught because he was lying about a bunch of other stuff, and it tipped these guys off. So anyway, I'm sitting in this room with these guys, and there was one thing that I did do that I guess I should mention. So the lead investigator was a real asshole. He was just a prick, and he was really threatening me with all kinds of, jail time and this and that. And so I did some of my pre-real estate investor investigatory days and did some digging up on him. Turns out he was a failed attorney, and he had just filed a massive bankruptcy personally, and he'd fucked over a lot of people with a lot of money that he had owed. And so I pulled the docs on the bankruptcy. And so anyway, we go through probably an hour and a half of interrogation, and they're putting files in front of me, and they're like, do you know this guy? Did you fill this out? Did you do this? Did you do that? And obviously my answer to all this is no, 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 no. And they're getting pretty frustrated. And then he leans over the table and he goes, there's a lot of people that got hurt in this, and you're to blame. And at that point, I laid into him, actually. I said, you have no idea what this is all about, and nobody got hurt in this deal. The only people that got hurt were the banks that eventually ended up getting bailed out. The borrowers that you're so-called trying to protect were in on the deal. And on top of that, I'm not going to take this crap from somebody who just filed a massive personal bankruptcy, who really did fuck people over. And so that didn't go well. We ended the meeting, we left, and of course nothing stuck because I hadn't done anything wrong, but they were trying to pin it on me. They ended up charging the loan officer that worked for me with a variety of different things, and he can never work in any sort of a financial capacity ever again. But anyway, the reason why I tell you that story is because it was pretty gnarly deal to deal with at the time. On top of the fact that the market was just in terrible shape, and we're trying to figure out how to transition from being a mortgage company to a full-time real estate investment firm in the midst of all of this, right? And so to have dealt with that and dealt with the market and all of the variables that go along with that at the same time, that's why I'm not really, it doesn't faze me. I'm not really too frightened by the market corrects, it changes, whatever, so be it. At that time, at that point, I had some capital, but I'm sitting much prettier now than I was then. So really, at the end of the day, if it happens, it happens, and we're cautiously moving forward with our investments. We're not making stupid buys by any means, but that was the landscape back then, and it was pretty crazy, and it was pretty gnarly, and there was just a whole bunch of stuff going on. And so then we had, of course, the short sale phenomenon that went on. There were a lot of people that ended up getting in deep doo-doo for that because there were some loopholes that investors found and whatnot. But the crux of all of this was the fact that there was just a lot of loosey-goosey financing. There were a lot of cockamamie schemes that could be put together in terms of like inflating price, getting cash, not paying the mortgage eventually, letting notes go bad and taking money on the front end. None of that is happening now. So, the massive amount of depreciation that happened with these homes, the value drops, it happened because of the massive amount of foreclosures that occurred. And even with a slowing economy, even with an economy shedding jobs and foreclosure rates bumping up substantially from what they're at now, it just won't happen at the rate that it did then. Which means, for me personally, I feel like the most that this market could correct, and I think this is probably realistic in the most frothy areas of the most frothy markets, is probably a 10% correction on price. And that 10% may be a staggered 18-month, decrease in price, and then a flat line of another maybe 18 months after that before we see any sort of price gains again once we reach the pinnacle. That's my guess on where the market goes, just because there is no underlying financing issues. There are no finance and securities mortgage office raids occurring like what happened with me for the reasons that it happened. You can't do it. Everything's full doc. All the income has to be supported. All the loans have to be fully underwritten legitimately, and the income has to be proved. And so the only reason for those loans to go bad is the fact that people are going to lose their jobs. And if they lose their jobs and they run out of savings, then they'll go to foreclosure. And so there's only a small percentage that will happen like that comparatively to what happened in the last cycle back in 2008. So bottom line is that I don't think that we're on the precipice of repeating history. I know the title of this podcast is, the Visiting the Ghost of Real Estate Past. I don't think we're on the precipice of that. I think that we have some other issues that are pretty major that need to be looked at, but I think those issues are outside real estate, and those outside real estate issues I think will affect real estate prices to some extent, but it's going to be limited because real estate's not the epicenter. You're not having the crazy stories, I can tell you guys all kinds of crazy stories about the mortgage days and the characters that, were a part of that and the crazy stuff that I was doing with them sometimes, but that's really not the case anymore. It's a much cleaner business. It's just a much more well put together business all the way around, and the paper that's being funded is paper that's legit paper, and there isn't anything funky about it. I know there's some, posts out there that stated income loans are coming back and low down payment loans are coming back, and I haven't seen any legitimate stated income loans that are legit for W-2 type buyers. I have seen stated income to a 70, 75% loan to value for legitimate self-employed people with assets to proof, large amounts of assets to proof and high credit scores. You can call that risky business, but that's the best paper you can fund, and that's what people don't realize. So that loan, I have 100% confidence in not failing at all. What I don't have 100% confidence in having a low failure rate is the low down payment stuff, the FHA stuff. And that's the broken part of our lending system, is that they look at income, not assets. They value income more than they value assets. And so they'll give somebody a 97% loan with 3% down if they have steady income and very little assets. Well, that person loses their job. Guess what? That paper's going bad, and they're already upside down 3% in their house. So that then becomes a short sale. It becomes a foreclosure much easier than that 75% stated income loan to value, transaction where an individual has, 3 times the down payment in cash on hand that's liquid. So that would be my concern, is the first-time homebuyer market, the first-time homebuyer type programs, the low down payment programs, if the economy starts to shed jobs. But I think that's a limited part of the market, and that will only affect prices by probably a maximum of 10% if you couple that with increased inventory and higher interest rates. Now, the last thing that I want to mention is, and this wasn't so much a thing in the last go-round, and I think this will be a factor in real estate values moving forward as well, is property tax bond measures. I've laid into this a couple of times. This is the biggest sham on the planet right now, and ramming through property tax bond measures based on fear, based on your kids need the education, they need safety. Right now we have another initiative on the ballot after two of the biggest property tax bond measures ever in the last go round. We have another $625 million one here in Portland, where the city of Portland wants to build affordable housing. They don't want to put it in the hands of the developers and commission us to do it, which we're set up to do. They want to take in $625 million, of which they've got $32 million for basically paperwork and administration. That's what they've got earmarked in this bill. And they don't even have any property. They don't even have anything. And so that is probably one of the biggest threats to value I see moving forward as well, because those bond measures stick for a long time, and those bond measures basically break down to monthly payments that have to be made via your property taxes, and it's the same as whether it's part of your mortgage or your property tax. You owe it at the end of the day, and you can't escape it. And so that would be another, I guess, factor in this whole dominoes of things that could eventually fall. So I hope the people of Portland are smart. They're doing a tri-county vote on this because they're trying to get more money, and they're hoping that if they go 3 counties to vote, and then it touches everybody in all those counties on their property tax bills, they can get more money. But I think it's going to backfire. I hope it's going to backfire, and the people in the outer counties will not vote it through, and they won't get it. But it's on the heels of what was some of the biggest bond measures ever for schools previously, which they've already squandered that money. But that's another piece. That could be a whole nother show. But basically, bottom line is this. I feel like we're in a market where it's going to be inventory and interest rate driven in terms of where values go. And I think that we're going to be at a sustained peak with a slight decrease in value over probably a 12 to 18 month period. And that's what we're looking at. And that's how we're underwriting deals moving forward. There isn't going to be any crazy stuff. There isn't going to be any, mortgage office raids, at least that I know of. I mean, there may be. There's probably some crazy shit going on out there. Who knows? There always is. But not in mass. Not there, the 24-year-old kid who was the loan officer that I had hired isn't masterminding some big crazy scheme like what was happening in the last go-round. It's just not happening. Or at least it's, it'd be an anomaly if it did. It wouldn't be the norm. That's for sure. And, a lot of the quote unquote amateurs are not getting into this with pump and dump schemes or weird type of stuff to extract money on the front end of transactions. It's just not happening anymore. And people that are getting loans, for the most part, should be getting those loans. And the ones that are the highest at risk are those that just have low down payment. So that's the Ghost of Real Estate Past, I'll tell you. And, I'm looking forward to whatever comes. It doesn't scare me. It doesn't bother me. It's just what it is, right? The market's kind of fluid. The last thing that I'll leave you with is that everything sells for a price, right? The market doesn't freeze. The homes always sell. That first home that, circling back to the beginning of this podcast that I told you about that we got under contract, we sold that house in a week back in the beginning of 2009, a week to a first-time home buyer. And we made good money doing it. So, everything sells for a price, even in the epicenter of just a shitstorm in terms of an economy. And back then, I'll remind you guys, people were thinking about doing bank runs. They thought, the banking system was almost ready to collapse, and we still sold that property in a week because it was turnkey and it was a great value, and the market absorbed it at that price. So I'll remind you that everything sells at a price. It's just a matter of what that price is. And that's the Ghost of Real Estate Past. So I look forward to whatever happens in the future. I know we're prepared for it, but I would not let, fear-mongering prevent you from moving forward with your real estate investing business. I'd just go and do it eyes wide open and realize what, the likelihood is. And as long as you underwrite stuff with that in mind, you should be fine.
hopefully you guys enjoyed this week's stroll down memory lane as we take a look back at what 2008 was all about. And hopefully by understanding what it is that we went through, for those of you guys that weren't in the trenches back then going through it, we can kind of look forward and see what's on the horizon and ultimately what worst case could be moving forward. Now, of course, we don't have a crystal ball. We don't know for sure, but I put my thoughts out there. I put my guess out there. I know a lot of people are afraid to do that because they don't want to be wrong, but I put it out there because that's how we're operating, and that's basically the assumptions under which we're buying deals moving forward and how we're underwriting stuff. So hopefully you guys enjoyed this week's episode, and hopefully you enjoyed my stories. Now, before I leave you, I've got a closing success quote, and this week's quote is by Noah Kagan from AppSumo. Many of you guys may have heard of him, but he's got a really cool quote that I like. There's a lot of business books out there, and I'm not knocking reading books because I think it's important. I think a lot of people waste their lives listening to music when they could be getting more educated. But I read this quote, and I thought, you know what? This really applies to especially this week's show. The quote is, "My favorite business book of all time is Experience." I like that. Figured it would apply to this week's show. All right, folks. Hopefully you enjoyed it. See you all on the next one.